Successful sewing is like following a recipe. Today, we have collected lots of ingredients for you. Our recipe whips together the sugar and spice of wonderful teachers, project ideas with a unique twist of flavor, and a generous sifting of fabric, lace, and trim. The result will be sweet sewing success. So let's start cooking up something just for you. Welcome to my sewing room. I'm so pleased to have as my guest today Lezette Thomason. Lezette is the owner of Children's Corner Patterns. Lezette, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Martha. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to sew the bottom of a lined garment. I have a little plain button on the shoulder applique jumper, and this jumper can be completely finished. The last thing you will sew will be the lining to the garment fabric. Next to it is a little A-line skirt, easy to make. The girls love these little skirts. Again, the last thing you sew on the skirt is the garment to the lining at the bottom. On this board, I have another little A-line short top. It is completely finished down to the buttons and buttonholes, except for sewing the garment to the garment lining. It's paired with just a little pair of ruffled pull-on pants. And now I'm going to show you the technique for sewing this one last seam around the bottom. I have divided my garment and my lining into 4 sections: the side seam, the center front, and the center back on both the garment and the lining. Now I'm going to go to one side seam and I'm going to separate the garment from the lining. Right now they are wrong sides together and we need them to be right sides together to sew. So we're going to just pull them apart and then flip them around and put them back together at that side seam. Now let me show you this one more time. I'm going to do this in fours. I'm going to go to one side seam and I'm going to separate garment from lining, which are wrong sides together. I need them right sides together. So I'm going to pull them apart, flip them around, and put right sides together, put a pin there, and pin 1/4 of this garment together.
Just 1/4 of the skirt at a time?
Just 1/4 of the skirt, okay. Martha. And the reason I do this is 1/4 at a time. You do not stretch one piece, because nothing is worse than getting almost around and one being bigger than the other. Then you have to rip out. When you do 1/4 at a time, this doesn't happen. Now I'm going to be sewing this with a 1/4 inch foot and making a 1/4 inch seam.
Straight stitch, of course. Straight
stitch, and just sew, taking out my pins as I go. And I'm going to sew 1/4. Now I'm going to stop. And now I'm just going to flip this and show you what I have done. Now there is 1/4 finished. Now you are going to, from there, you're going to do the 2nd 4th and the 3rd 4th the exact same way. Now I want to show you how to finish that last 4th. On this garment, it is all sewn except for 1/4 of it. I'm going to turn my garment inside out, and when on your pattern instructions, it will have told you to leave an opening in the side seam.
Of the lining?
Of the lining.
Okay.
I'm going to stick my hand through that hole and I'm going to grab that unstitched section and I'm going to pull it out through the hole in my lining. And then I'm going to put it together dress and dress lining raw edges together and just pin in place. Now, once you do this, you're going to find that it is so quick and easy, and there'll just be one last step when we finish that I will show you. So now again, I'm going to put this back at my machine, pick up where I've left off with my 1/4 inch seam, and just continue to sew. Stop and take out pins rather than sew over them.
Straight stitch, final section.
Straight stitch, final section. I'm there, raise my foot, cut off my threads. Now I've got a wadded up mess, but I'm just going to go right to my hole and the side seam, pop everything back in. There's your hole in your lining that you can whip closed. Now you're going to be turning your dress right side out, shake it out, and now it's completely finished except for that tiny bit of hand stitching down to the buttons and buttonholes and the pretty embellishment.
Oh, Lezette, thank you so very much.
Wasn't
That's
that
something
easy?
that well, it is, but that's something that throws people is the hemming, lining garments, and I'm so glad you made it so easy.
Martha, do you know this question is one question I have almost every day
Is
at
that
Children's
right?
Corner?
On how to.
And see how easy it is.
Well, it is the way you show it. Thank you very much, Lezette. And now Lezette has some sewing inspirations to share with you. Lezette, this top is adorable. Tell us about it.
Martha, this is a pattern that I think all little girls will like. It has a round yoke. It has kind of fluted sleeves, a tucked bodice, so you get to use sort of an heirloom technique making those tucks, and a gored skirt. Now this is drafted to have gores that fall into that little nice little flute around the bottom, but you don't have to sew any seams. And this is the perfect top to wear with jeans.
Well, with jeans and also a shirt, a turtleneck long sleeve shirt underneath it, also for winter.
It can be done like that, but it is just so nice where mothers want to continue sewing for their girls, and they can make a nice top to wear on a casual skirt or jeans.
And tops are so in right now too.
They
to wear
are
with jeans.
in.
Now, is this the same version
This
in just
is
a dress?
the same version,
So
just
cute.
longer in a summer sundress. And then, Martha, you can make it in the wintertime out of wool or corduroy to wear with a turtleneck. So it's just a
Adorable.
very versatile little pattern.
This is so cute.
This is a very old pattern, and the reason I want to talk about it is because all of you have had occasion where your collar doesn't fit. It does not meet in the back. Sometimes it's made wrong, and sometimes it is cut out wrong, because you cut out a collar for trim and you put piping on it, and lo and behold, you have a big gap in the front. And Mrs. Johnson taught us to move the collar to the back, and then in the center cut another little smaller collar, I call it a little petal, and then make that and just let the top collars overlap. And then I embellish this one just by putting it down front and back with little buttons to hold it in place.
Now, didn't she call this the boo-boo collar?
She called this the boo-boo collar.
Miss Elizabeth Johnson.
Travis Johnson,
We'll
yes.
always miss her, Lizette. Anyway, how darling. All right, now this is adorable too. Another wonderful collar treatment.
This is another different little pleated, simple dress, sleeveless. This is also one of Mrs. Johnson's collars, and I changed the shape of it because it originally came down in a big scallop, but now more modern is just to put that same little scallop in the front, a little trim, and fasten it down with buttons.
Thank you so much, Lizette. And now Lizette has some construction tips to share with you. Lizette, this ruching and ruffling is simply magic. Tell us about it.
Well, Martha, this is just a little A-line shift, and it is embellished with ruching. Now, ruching is a gathered strip that is finished on both edges. This one is finished with a rolling whip. The next little dress is a button on the shoulder A-line. It has black check ruching down the front, and the difference is after we sewed on the ruching, then we sewed a ribbon down the front of it. Now, on this garment over here that is a work in progress, the top is lined with the pants fabric. It has a ruching at the bottom of the top, embellished with green rickrack to bring the green out of the fabric. The pants repeat this at the bottom with a ruffle, also finished with a rolling whip, and our rickrack. Now, I want to show you how to make ruffles and ruching. The first thing we're going to do is to roll and whip our edge. Now, to do that, first of all, you need a foot that has a groove or a tunnel in the bottom. This allows the fabric to actually roll up in that little tunnel. You can't do it with a flat sole full, it will just squunch it together. I'm going to set my machine on zigzag, and I'm going to stitch so that one stitch goes in the machine and the other stitch goes off into the air, and a stitch width of 3 to 3.5 and a stitch length of 0.5. So I'll just continue rolling down through here. Now, when you have rolled your edge, it will look like this, a pretty rolled and whipped edge here, your original hand sewing by machine technique. On the ruching, both sides are rolled and whipped. Now, to make a ruffle, your next step is to put in your machine gathering. Your machine gathering, the first row goes 1/8 inch from the raw edge. The second is 3/8 of an inch from the raw edge. This leaves your 1/4 inch sewing line to be exactly between the two lines of stitching, and this allows you to control your gathers more evenly without any little flip-flops over making tucks. Now, when you do your ruching, you put in 3 lines of length of machine stitching. One, I set the edge of my machine foot beside of my roll. You can move your needle position if you need to. Stitch 1, and then do the other second line of stitching that foot's width over from the bottom row, and the other one right down the middle. Pull up all 3 of them to the length you need. At the bottom, this shows what your ruffle looks like when it is pulled up, and again, you would sew it on down between the lines of lengthened stitching, where between and the bottom line of gathering holds it perfectly in place. On the ruching, you would sew right on top of this middle line, and you have your outside gathering threads to hold that in place. If you were going to put ribbon down the middle of this afterwards, leave your outside gathering threads there until you have sewn on your embellishment ribbon rickrack down the middle, and then pull them out, and that holds your gathers in place perfectly.
Lezette, thank you so much for sharing these magic tricks that you are so famous for. Thank you so much. And now we have a beautiful doll dress to share with you. As you know, I love dolls and doll dressing, and we have a really adorable doll dress for you with a really nice technique, and of course it's easy. This little doll dress, the little yellow dress, is so sweet. It has the entredeaux and the gathered lace edging on the doll dress. The little pinafore is this really interesting technique which I want to share with you today. Now look at the little angel sleeves, and it has wonderful sleeves on the little dress. But let's come on down and look at the skirt on this pinafore. The pinafore actually has a front panel with the scallop skirt, and I want to turn her around because she has a back panel with the 2 parts of the scallop skirt. Now let me turn her back around. What I'm going to share with you today is how easy it is to make this lined panel pinafore with the scallops. And I absolutely love scallops on little doll clothes and also on little girl clothes. First of all, I'm going to have the pinafore front, and let me open up here. I have a pinafore lining. The printed fabric is the lining. So right sides to right sides, I'm going to first of all trace the scallops onto the bottom of the skirt. And I like to use those little dot, 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 rather than a straight line, because it's easier to get the blue markers out. The next step is going to be to stitch all the way down the side, and then I'm going to stitch. Now this is just regular thread. There's no wash away basting thread here, just regular thread. And I'm going to come around the scallop, stitch all the way around the scallop, and I've already done that on the next step. You see I stitched all the way down the side and all the way around each one of these scallops. It is now time to trim the scallops. This is probably down to, a little more than 1/4 of an inch. I trimmed the side, I trimmed the scallops, and I'm also going to have little clips. Be careful and don't clip the actual thread, but I'm going to have little clips, especially a clip right here in the center, because that's where you really want these scallops to be able to be pressed really pretty. So I've trimmed it all the way and done the little clips all the way across, and then it is time to turn it right side out. So I'm going to turn it right side out, and it's really important that you press this and make those scallops absolutely perfect, because it is such a pretty technique, but it really does need to be sewn really, really carefully and trimmed, and then especially when you turn it right side out, trim it and press it carefully. Now, just like Lezette has shown you a few minutes ago, we're going to run gathering threads at the top of this little skirt. This will be the front pinafore. Front of the pinafore, I'm going to run a gathering row at about 1/4 and then a gathering row at about 3/4 of an inch. Long gathering stitches. I'm going to run 2 rows, pull it up, adjust it. I will also mark the center point of both the bodice of the pinafore and this, and then I will distribute the gathers and sew it on, and I now have that wonderful little lined, as you can see, here's the lining. I have that wonderful little lined pinafore, a little scalloped lined pinafore. And now I have some hand embroidery to share with you. I am so pleased to have with me as my guest today Wendy Schoen. Wendy is the designer of Petite Pochette Patterns. She's a regular contributor to Sew Beautiful magazine, and she teaches at the Martha Pullen School of Art Fashion in Huntsville. Wendy has also studied at the Royal School of Needlework. Wendy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Martha. I brought a project this time that's a little bit different than what I normally bring. This is a sewing etui. It's for ladies to put their treasured sewing implements inside, and as you can see, I've made this one just to match what I wanted. So I have my 2 stilettos, my scissor case, and that's for my needles. Now on the cover you'll see these stitches. This is an example of traditional fine white work. So white work consists of counted thread stitches and surface embroidery. So we're going to look at this heart here, which is the threaded honeycomb stitch, and it is a counted thread stitch. So let's go ahead to the design hoop. Now the first thing I've done is I've marked the placement of my grid or my honeycomb. I'm going to begin by bringing in the needle on the side, and normally I would tie on the edge with a few little back stitches or just 1 or 2, whatever, just to anchor the thread, because I'm going to stitch over that later. Now I am going to be progressing down. I'm stitching upward, but I'm moving downward. Does that make sense? In other words, I'm coming up from the bottom, sewing up to the top, but my blocks are going to go downward to the right. So that tells me the direction that I want my blocks to go will tell me how I'm going to actually approach the stitch. If I'm moving down, then I want to go down first and stitch forward or above instead of the opposite. If I were reversing the motion, then I would be stitching on the upper edge of the stitch and then down to the bottom. Okay, so that's where I am now. This is my first completed row, which as you can see is done on the diagonal. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to complete my next row, which will be above. So remember, I'm going above, so that means I want to start with the stitch at the top. I'm going to go on the same row as before, come up in the opening, 4 stitches up, or 3 stitches up and 4 stitches across. The count can be just about anything you want it to be as long as you have a block. So if you are working on an even grid fabric or an even weave linen, you can count on having the same number of threads each way, but that doesn't always happen. So you have to do a sample to see. So as I work along, I'm going to notice a couple of things. The stitches that are aligned in length are on the same row of the fabric, but the stitches that go next to each other have a thread in between. So you don't bring this one directly into the last hole because that wouldn't be the correct place. Okay, so now for the next step, once you get your grid completely stitched, and this is what it will look like. Now I want to do the threaded portion. I'm coming in and I have a tapestry needle so that I don't nip the fabric. I'm coming in at the center of the open block. I'm going to bring the needle through there, come back up to the other row, the one above, down below. This is going to be done alternately until I reach the end. I'm almost there. This does go quickly, but you still have to be conscious of where you're putting the needle. Now, because it would be natural for this last stitch to go upward, I'm going to anchor my thread a little bit higher than before. So that's my parking place, for lack of a better term. So now, to work the next row, I'm going to come up. Of course, you can't come up in the same place, so just above is fine. I'm going to rotate my work so I can control it better, and you can do the same. Now I'm going to do the opposite. I'm coming in on this edge, going down to the other block below, come back, and this is going to be worked across and back until the entire grid is completed. And it really does give it a lot of dimension with just a little bit of effort. Your most valuable tool with this is good magnification. So I'm going to anchor my thread there, and then for the next row, remember, you're going to start at the center of the next opening, which is right there. And then that way the edge stitches will be going in the right direction. So I really hope you try it because there's nothing to this technique. So have a go at it.
Well, it's absolutely beautiful. And didn't you say this is used in Ayrshire work?
Yes. Any type of counted thread stitch, pulled thread stitch, or surface embroidery, finely done is dominant in that type of embroidery.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And now I would like to share a piece with you from my vintage collection. I have another wonderful story to share with you. Lezette Thomason brought this dress to share. This was worn by her great niece Katie after her christening because Katie was walking when the christening took place. Now, Lezette found this at a flea market - antique store, completely handmade, Swiss batiste, hand rolled and whipped, and Lezette found it for $10 at a flea market. Of course, she grabbed it quickly, and the whole dress is absolutely fabulous with antique lace, probably 1950s era, and Lezette made a little slip to go with it. And then after the christening for her great niece Katie, and we have beautiful Katie right here, she changed her into this beautiful little dress that's probably, 50 or 60 years old. She changed her out of her 150-year-old christening gown. And this is the whole story about why you're making these beautiful dresses right now. These are going to be passed down. And I will tell you this one was found, and it should never have been in that antique store because your dresses that you're making won't end up at an antique store. But the beautiful thing is that you are going to be passing these lovely dresses down that you're making now. And be sure that you tuck a little family history in with them, and be absolutely sure that you make a picture of the little baby girl or little baby boy. Needless to say, a little boy won't wear a short dress, but be sure you make pictures and be sure it gets passed down to the people that appreciate it. And now I want to thank you so much for joining me again today. I certainly hope you've had fun. I have. And I would like to invite you to come back next time.